This is Henry Chamberlain. It's my distinct honor to get to chat with Sarah Firth. She's a well-known, wonderful cartoonist and graphic recorder, and this is her book, Think on the Page. And we're going to be chatting about Think on the Page and talking about the creative life. Thank you so much, Sarah, for doing this interview.
Thanks for having me, Henry. I've really enjoyed your book reviews that I've been reading.
Oh,
okay.
Now here's something that might be rather obscure for some folks, but maybe not for others, cartoonists especially. A Trip to York. Now this is just a wonderful thing that I totally relate to. A lot of people can, is creating a journal of a trip, and I know I always end up doing it on some level. I used to do it more when I was much younger, because you're out of your element and you want to document everything. And I noticed in one of your videos that you're talking about stuff and you showed your journals. Now, my first question to you, is this actually the journal and it's been published or oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's
so that was actually the hardbound journal, and it was such a pain in the butt to scan and turn into an actual book, because when I work on the page, I color right to the edge. And so trying to print it so I didn't lose half of my text was a big thing. So yeah, in future, when I do a travel journal, I'm going to work differently in the book so that I can print it. But yeah, that's it. That's the travel journal.
Well, that's impressive, because usually when I do one, there's some pages that are very loose and they're not something I would want to publish, but you managed to keep it where it's very very cohesive. Even though it's so much fun and spontaneous, you managed to make it something that somebody totally out of the blue can come and look and enjoy. So yeah,
good. I'm glad to hear that, because yeah, it's a bit of it was a self project, and so the fact that it's interesting to anyone else is nice.
Well, I can also pepper this interview with a few images that'll pop up here and there, but I just want to show this. And this is just a random page, folks, and the whole book is like this. It's just observations and just quirky stuff. I recently interviewed Grant Snyder, and
oh yeah,
he said that he found that when he takes stuff that's very specific to him, very personal, that is what resonates with people. So taking things that he thinks, so that's just too weird, nobody else could relate to, that's what people relate to, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I wanted to share with folks that when you get the book, you may also get a few treats. Like I got this little mini comic and I got a sticker. I love stickers. I just love stickers so much. And then this other sticker. And then this book, COVID Chronicles, this could be where a lot of people will discover your work for the first time. And it's a great introduction to what you do. And it shows off your interest in heartfelt subject matter as well as science. And because it goes into COVID, of course, but also climate change. And it's just a wonderful item in this showcase of talent.
It's a great book. There's so many good pieces in there. Yeah.
And then I have another one. See, I do my research.
I love it.
Growing up disabled in Australia, which is easy enough to find. Most commonly, you could find it on Amazon, but there's other places too. I imagine on your website as well.
Yeah. Yep.
And this it's a wonderful sharing of your growing up and having dyslexia. And I don't even know about neurodivergent, but I understand. And so, but it was a struggle, but now it's something that, like Grant Snyder was saying, the things that are most personal, actually, the things people will resonate with people so much. They understand, they can relate to it. And so, but I don't know if that's something that sparks any thoughts to you for you to.
Yeah. I mean, that comic in Growing Up Disabled in Australia, I was invited to create a comic for that, and the rest of the book is prose, written word. So, I felt a little bit intimidated to be making a comic in a text-heavy book. And I felt quite vulnerable writing about learning disabilities and brain difference because previously it's something I haven't talked about publicly, mainly because of fear of prejudice and it impacting particularly client work. It's like as a graphic recorder where I'm writing live and fast in front of groups, I imagine that certain clients might, not want to hire me if they knew that I had trouble with words. But I've found, workarounds, and over time, sort of doing more client work with, disability and work advocacy groups, I've felt like I have an opportunity to kind of use my privilege as an artist in the public eye and things to talk about these things. And like I have the luxury of being able to talk about this without it causing problems. So that's what I decided to do is, yes, I will share this story, this very personal story, with the hope of, either inspiring people who might be struggling or who've never been diagnosed or never, who've thought that they were stupid or something, to realize that actually, people's brains work very differently, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. You might just need different approaches. And so that's how that piece came about. And it's also, like you would have read in the story, that's how I got into graphic recording, which is the live visual note taking, because for me, what's helped with dyslexia and spelling issues is making work spatial rather than linear, with graphic recording, because you have words and pictures spatially located. At least for my brain, I can understand concepts faster and also understand language better. And even now I feel like I've gotten a lot better at reading, but still when I read just text-based words, I will sometimes use a ruler or at least like underline as I read, or use my finger as I read to stop the like movement that happens between words when I read. But yeah, that book was really scary for me to make a piece for, just because I felt quite exposed. But the response that I've had from that has been beautiful. I've had people who don't normally read comics come and email me or talk to me and say, I love that comic. I didn't know comics could do that. But also people who are adults, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who struggle with reading and writing. And the piece inspired them to go and investigate more or get tested, this type of stuff. And also just younger students saying, this is my experience at school, I totally relate, and it's really hard, but also I've got special ways of seeing things, and that's actually an advantage. So I feel like it was worth it, and it was very beautiful. And also the whole book does a really great job of talking about and sharing how diverse disability, learning difference, deafness is, and how important it is to talk about this stuff. Because I can't remember who said it exactly, but like we will all become disabled at some point in our lives, whether that's temporary or when we become older. And so having an awareness of the barriers and the important things to fight for with that is really useful for everybody, So yeah, I feel quite proud of that book for everyone who, put in work for it. Yeah.
I'm overjoyed because we were having technical difficulties. Now we're streamlining through this, and that was a wonderful thing you just said. Oh well, gosh, there's so many ways to do this interview. I'm kind of tempted to ask you about the graphic novel. I saw that other video you did recently, and you showed a few samples from it. Eventually, everything connects, which it looks great from the little bit I've seen. Is there something you might want to share about that project?
Yeah, so I've been slowly working away at a graphic novel for the past 7 years. Like historically, I was trained as a sculptor, went through fine art, never trained in writing, have my barriers with words. And so I never considered myself a writer. But in 2015, I kind of just went, I think I want to make a book. And so I've slowly been doing the research, having the discussions to build this book that is nonfiction. And it's kind of in the realm of being a PhD in regards to what it's looking at.
Yeah.
And like the actual underpinning idea for it is like very conceptual, but it's not. It's like digestible, friendly book that, is not hard to read, hopefully. But it's looking at how it's basically looking at hypercomplexity, which is why it's called Eventually Everything Connects. And it's looking at how, because we live in a world that's hyper complex these days, and we're much more aware of the impacts of actions and ideas and different groups of people, and all the tangle of stuff. The book is very much like, how on earth do I, as a little person, do you, as a little person in the world, make some sense of what's going on and what we want to do? I shouldn't say we, it's like very much me, but then also asking kind of rhetorical questions to invite the reader into thinking about how they respond to or disagree with me. So yeah, it sounds very conceptual, but it's very much like almost everyone I know wakes up and goes, what the hell is going on? What do I do? What does my life mean? Arg. And so it's playing with those like nebulous and uncomfortable like life questions, philosophical questions, and then looking at different approaches that are like serious and good, but then also like approaches that are quite frivolous and fun, because I feel like with big topics like climate change and like pandemic, it's so painfully serious and huge that, at least to me, you need some kind of comic relief or some kind of silliness or some kind of buoyancy, because otherwise it's just like, terminally serious and you get stuck. So the book is playing with like trying to juggle the like, complexities of stuff. But yeah, so I've been working on that for slowly about 7 years. I finally got an agent last year, which was a game changer. And we finally found a publisher who, we had a lot of rejections. I think it's like over 50 now, which was like a bit emotionally draining for me. Like started to second guess myself a lot. But we've found a publisher in Australia called Allen Unwin, who's like one of Australia's biggest publishers. They have a new imprint called JOAN that's run by Nakkiah Lui, who is a very well-known Indigenous activist, writer, and actor. And she loved the book, and like we're very much on the same wavelength. And so I feel like it's finally found like an amazing advocate and a fabulous home. And we're just negotiating the terms and conditions and paperwork before I get to work. So it's going to be still a long year at least of making it. But yeah, it's the longest project I've ever worked on. And I feel very out of my depth and like simultaneously excited.
It's common for it to take years.
Yes, that's something that's like, the more you talk to other comic artists about the nuts and bolts, the more you realize that like, if your book takes under 10 years, that's pretty good. And don't freak out. Because when you talk to people who don't make comics, or, they're like, are you still working on that book? It's like, it's been 2 years. You're still working on it. You're taking a while. And then you go, oh, is this bad? So yeah. But under 10 years is good, I think. Yeah.
Well, I was about to say the exact same thing. That's pretty common. It takes years.
Yeah.
It takes years, even if you did it all by hand, or even if you did it digitally, it's still going to take the time it needs to take.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing for me is I draw quite fast, but writing's really slow for me. Writing is really hard. So that's my biggest challenge. And I'm looking forward to the reward for me of like having written it, having thumbnailed it, and then I can, ink. I work digitally, but I can ink the whole thing, and drawing and coloring is my favorite because then I can like binge watch TV shows while I do that, or podcasts, and like that's really fun to me. So that's this kind of like reward. I mean, it's like a grind because you have to do however many pages each day, and it's like a marathon, but it's definitely easier on the brain for me than the writing part. Yeah.
Yeah, you get to a, you're going to do this and this for the next few hours. You can put a book on tape or whatever you want. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh goodness. Well, I'm going to just have to read this because I sometimes bite off more than I can chew. I make all these notes of things and I can't remember everything. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, I wanted to ask you about the comic art workshop. So
Oh,
that's
yeah.
a place you guys go to discuss long form comics. Can you give us a window into that?
Yeah. So part of why I decided to write a book in 2015 is because I heard about Comic Art Workshop. And to be able to go, you needed to be working on an ambitious long form comic project. And I thought, oh, I really want to go and hang out with all these comic artists who I just think are amazing. So that kind of prompted me making a book. And so I put together a pitch and went. And basically, the first one was on a tiny little island off Tasmania, which is the very bottom part of Australia that's not joined to the mainland. And we went to an old penal colony. So it's just big empty island with like an old penal prison and lots of wombats. And there were 14 of us, and we just spent every day workshopping each other's graphic novels and doing intensive learning. We had Tom Hart and Leela Corman come from the
Wow.
US, and we had T Boy come as well. And then I think everyone else was Australian comic artists. But it was hands down one of the most meaningful, brilliant, wholesome, excellent workshopping experiences I've ever had. And it was for 2 weeks. And yeah, it really opened my eyes to the art and craft of graphic novels. Like I just learned so much, and everyone's work was so different, and everyone was very, very generous with their feedback and their thinking, which was really refreshing because coming from fine arts, coming from sculpture, I came from a very harsh, traditional fine arts, hypercritical critique sort of environment. And so I'd only ever associated kind of workshopping and sharing your work as this kind of like intense, ego busting, smash you into a million pieces and tell you you're crap, basically, which was the style of the time. So yeah, having this space that was very safe and welcoming, even with, such amazing, talented, I mean, Tom and Leela are just so generous and amazing. But yeah, it was like beautiful nature plus intensive workshops plus people drinking too much at night, cooking together, and like going around the island telling ghost stories, going and doing collaborative drawing together, trying to draw, like there was a drawing competition for like drawing this impossible wall. There was this old convict wall that had so many bricks and it was falling apart, and it was so difficult technically to draw, and everyone was trying to draw the impossible wall. And the drawings are amazing. But yeah, so that happened in 2015. They had it again in 2017 in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. And that was tied together with the Ubud Readers and Writers Festival, and also an artist residency at Crack Studios. And those first 2 years were run by Pat Grant and Elizabeth McFarlane, who are well-known comics academic and comic artist. And there's another one hopefully coming up this year, and it's run by Ilari Harris, who's an editor for the Nib in the US, and Josh Santospirito, who's a Tasmanian comic artist. And it's a new batch of comic artists coming together and sharing their work. And I'm one of the like hanger-oners because my book is taking so long. There's myself and another artist, Gina, who are coming again, still with the same books, still working on them. But, you know, we have knowledge to pass on to the fresh blood. So yeah, really looking forward to that. Yeah.
Well, that's a great gift. All that information you just presented, that's wonderful. Very helpful for young people or whoever wants to draw, I mean, or do comics, that it doesn't have to be any particular age group. It tends to be younger folks. And I do know Tom and Leela. And
Yeah.
I'm just a lucky son of a gun because this is through my partner, Jennifer Daydreamer.
Oh, yeah.
And Jennifer Daydreamer goes back to the original crew in Seattle, the
Wow.
original 90s comics gang. So she knows that it's a very special time. And so I got a little taste of that.
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
Getting to know Tom a little bit. I mean, he's not like my best friend or anything, but getting a little taste of the 90s environment that lasted. That time period, I guess, started to dissolve in the early aughts, which is when I first met Jen. But yeah, so I kind of got an education in comics, a very intense education through my own efforts, because I've always been into comics on my own. It was a very self-driven thing because I did fine art painting, and so I know about the killer critiques. And I don't know why they have to be so killer. It's bizarre in a way because it's just masochistic, and I don't think they're trying to mimic what the galleries are going to be like. But I don't even think the galleries are that that harsh. Well, they can be, but anyway, it's a major digression I'm making right now. But let me pick up with another question. Well, a comment that I wanted to just point out is that I really love how articulate your stuff is.
Oh,
it's articulate while being earthy and real, or you're articulating the earthy and real, something like that. I'm sort of like, I've always like thinking about my next review. So I'm always cobbling together observations or things I want to phrase it just the right way, think it through just the right way. So I'm constantly doing that.
yeah.
It drives me crazy, but I love it too.
Yeah. I don't know. Everyone's process is so different with writing. And like, this is a challenge that I face with my graphic novel, is that when I'm making short pieces, like for Think on the Page, the book you were showing, or my travel journal, or the little comics that I make for social media, when I'm doing work in draft and it's just an idea, a short idea, I feel very free to use just my journal voice, you know, which is like the way I would, because I journal a lot. It's like the way I would write to myself. You know, it's just like me thinking on the page, and it's just casual language. But with writing a graphic novel, because I keep thinking it's proper, it's a book going into the world, it's got to be smart. Don't fuck it up. Oh, sorry. Don't mess it up.
That's fine.
It makes my work a little bit different and like overly tight and self-conscious, and it really annoys me, and I keep falling into that trap, and it's just a mental block that I have, because I can write freely in other contexts, but as soon as I feel like I'm trying to say something really important, I end up over explaining, overdoing it, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, that's my learning edge as a comic artist, is like trying to not freak myself out and to just keep, you know, the good sort of natural flow that I have, and trust that that's valuable, and I don't need to try to be smart and try to be clever. You know. Yeah, I was actually on a podcast the other week, and we were talking about imposter syndrome, and I was saying that I don't feel like I have imposter syndrome, But then the more we talked about it and looked at the different kinds of imposter syndrome, I realized that I may have imposter syndrome around this type that's called the expert, which is whenever I write or speak, I'm always so aware that I have such a limited understanding and limited view of whatever I'm talking about, unless it's literally my, experience of making a cup of tea in the morning. Like, that's very real and specific. But when I start, thinking about relationships, the world, politics, that, I only know so much. And that makes me hungry to research more and know more and be careful. But it also makes me feel like I don't have a right to talk about things because I'm not an expert, and everything that anyone says needs a million caveats, etc. And so that's just something that I'm thinking about a lot at the moment, is how to not block my creative flow by getting caught up in worrying about not being an expert or not fully understanding everything, because that is impossible. you know um and
Right.
you just learn as you go, and you make the best work that
Yeah.
you can with what you know, and that will change, and that's just the way it goes.
Oh, exactly. Well, I was going to add to that, that from what I've seen, I think maybe it's on in the nib pieces you've done, or maybe something you did on Medium. But I love the pieces you do that explain a concept or some scientific thing. I don't have an example of it, but well, actually, what's in COVID Chronicles is kind of like that. But a lot of them are very clean, lean, crisp, very precise. I mean, you've obviously you've revised your comments to just what you need to say, and they're very impressive. So
Mm.
I know it's a struggle when you start from scratch. You say, oh, is this one going to work?
Yeah, and that, like, so I have some peers here in Australia whose work I adore, and their work is very crystallized and minimal. It's kind of like poetry. And for me, I tend to write a lot and make a lot, like I'm excessive. And part of my writing process is blah, and then chop, 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 chop of like, what am I really saying? What am I really thinking? And that's naturally how I have to work, because I don't know how to, have clean thoughts straight from my head. But I still feel like I often use too many words, or I can get away with not having text on a panel and just show with an image. Like I still feel like with my craft, I'm working towards or aiming for something even more poetic or crisp, and making more space to counteract my fullness. Because I enjoy reading work that leaves a little bit of wiggle room for the reader, because I sometimes over explain or over detail, and I'll write the words and also draw the words, and it's like, you don't need to do both. Which one will you choose? But then there are works I've done, like the comic that maybe you read on Medium, that's about trying to make sense of complexity theory, because that is so much that is such an ideas driven piece that is very theory heavy. It's really hard to use minimal words. Like, you do just end up using a lot of words. And so I'm trying to figure out how to just like distill even more, and that's what I do as a graphic recorder. When you listen to people talk, you're constantly filtering for like, what are they actually saying? What are they trying to say? And what are they not saying? And it's like figuring out the most elegant way to represent that. And that applies to comics making as well. That said, there's no right way to make comics. Like, for example, I think of Linda Barry, and her work is very kind of baroque, and it's got everything in there, and the text and the texture, and that has so much richness and pleasure in it. So there's like, I don't think there's any right way, right, to make comics. It's just what you gravitate towards or prefer. And I would like to make work that's has a bit more white space, Yeah.
Well, that shows through. I do, and you are. People. How do I phrase this? I like sometimes to say there's a hierarchy, and there's some people are superstars. And Jennifer says, no, there's not. It's all, we're all equals. Well, okay, but people know your stuff, and they love your stuff. The cartoonists out there that are in the know, who are interested in this sort of stuff, they just love you. And
Oh,
the graphic recording world, even here in the United States, I wonder if it's kind of lagging behind what's going on in Europe. I don't want to make any judgments. I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but I'm curious what you think of that. Do you think the graphic recording scene might be a little more lively, or the general public's more willing to embrace it, and maybe it's a little different in other countries? Or
yeah, okay, so in 2014, I went to a big conference in Berlin that was called EU Viz, like European Visual Practitioners, EU Viz. And that was graphic recorders from all around the world, US, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, all together. And it was brilliant to meet everyone. And the like absolute diversity of practitioners and how they work and where they're working and how they apply their work was just fascinating to me. You have people working in hospitals who use graphic recording primarily to explain to illiterate patients how to take medicine or how a operation will work. And so they're using comic skills in a very, very practical, helpful community context. Then you have graphic recorders who are, essentially working as like entertainment at a big festival where they're kind of just drawing the vibe and, all kinds of different stuff. And then people working on policy, planning, environmental groups. There's so many different things and different styles. And what was interesting to me is talking with people about how much work they get. And there were definitely countries where it's just so much harder there are so many cultural barriers around getting graphic recorders into business contexts, because the arts are valued, but they're valued in a very boxed in way. It's like comics live over here, paintings live over here, and this is engineering. Whereas I feel like in Australia, there's some kind of competitive desire to be like America and be innovative. And so if you have something like graphic recording that can bring a value proposition that solves a problem for a client, they're really interested to bring you in because it makes them look good. But I also wonder if like Australia is like, this is just a stereotype, but there is a stereotype that Australia is very anti-intellectual. But there is some love of cartoons and gags and silly drawings and stuff like that. Maybe not as much appreciation as you have in the US or in France or Italy, where comics are very special culturally, and Japan, things like that. Like we don't really have that so much in Australia, other than like editorial cartoon artists. Like they have some kind of reputation. But there is some appetite for graphic recording, mainly because it's really hard to communicate complex ideas to groups of people. And I've been doing this work professionally for 12 years, across all different industries, so that it's really emergent and fascinating. And it's been done, like graphic recordings as old as the history of time. People have been drawing in sand to explain things to each other. And it was like super popularized in the 70s in the US, like in California with like technology stuff. And then it's kind of rippled out into other industries, health, whatever. My brain just went blank, but all the other sectors, education. And yeah, I don't know how much you want me to go on about this, because I can like really
No.
I can bang on about how valuable, because I have to sell, like, because a lot of people are like, don't you just do cute drawings? Like, what is it that you do? Why should
Oh
I pay
yeah.
you money? So I have to be really good at selling why what I do is not just that, it's also
Yes.
useful in all these other ways, and explaining how memory works, mark making works, collaborative design works, all kinds of stuff. And then people are like, oh, this is actually very useful. But yeah.
Well, yeah, you hit on all the things that you're on the same page as what I'm suggesting, that things can get boxed in. That certainly happens in the U.S. Cartoonists, people who make comics aren't necessarily thinking about, oh, graphic recording, that's an interesting world. They can be very separate, but that could change. I mean, in a generation or sooner. I don't know, but people do like to stay in their camps or what's comfortable for them. So it's all, but it's just this human nature too.
Yeah, there's actually a great project that I'd like to mention to you that you might want to check out. And it is Australia specific, but it applies to graphic storytelling anywhere in the world. And it is, trying to remember what the project is called, but basically the folks who ran the comic art workshops originally, they actually got together, got grants to do some academic research around how visual storytelling, i.e. comics, words and pictures, are being used in innovative, unexpected contexts. And they have case studies and research around how that's being used in the legal context, in the health context, in the urban design context, all these graphic recording, consulting, a whole bunch of stuff. And it's a report, but they've also made this beautiful fold out poster that has just so many brilliant insights around the comics community, the zine community, graphic medicine, using comics for therapy in medical contexts. And it's got all of it in there. And I feel like it paints such an important picture of the various different ways that comics are going and can go in the future that aren't the traditional editorial comic books, syndicated, avenues that most people think of. So that's a really exciting project. I can send you more info about that, but yeah,
that'd be great.
I want everyone to look at it because it's really great. Yeah.
Well, you've been very generous with your time. I know you're very busy and you've got a full day ahead of you. I just, unless you had any other thoughts, this is the book that we've been chatting about, Think on the Page. And so thank you so much, Sarah.
No worries. I just thought of one other thing, which is, I don't know if it's worth mentioning how I work, which is I just use my iPad like this. And just draw into it using Procreate. And this is an example of a graphic recording here. And that's done live as people talk. And then, like other just sort of, these are the like simple comics that I make mainly just for social media or whatever. And I use Procreate, which is this software, which I think is fantastic. And it's actually made by like 2 guys in Tasmania.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's cool. And it's a one-off payment, which I love. It's like, don't actually know, but it's like one-off payment. It's like $59 forever, as opposed to Adobe, which is like $79 every month. Too expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I pay $10 for just to use Photoshop, and I've been using Procreate now for a while. And I think we paid here in the US like $20. I think it was $20.
Yeah.
But yeah, Procreate's just a wonderful tool. It's something that's so accessible. That's the beauty of it. That's the main attraction to it, because then if you dig deeper, there's other little tricks and stuff that you can do
And you can even do VR, like you can do a drawing and then actually it's not called VR. It's called AR, augmented reality. You can like create a drawing and then put it into video mode and it looks like that object is in your room. There's all these like hacks that it
I
does.
haven't tried that.
Yeah, I saw someone doing it. I don't actually know how to do it, but I just thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. Um, but yeah, I was curious to ask you, how did you find out about graphic recording? Because it's something that like when comic artist friends that I have mentioned to me that like, you know, they need to make some money or they're having a hard time, I'm like, have you thought about graphic recording? And a lot of people have never heard of it or they just think it's really scary or something. But it like to me, it's a really interesting and useful avenue to make some money if you are someone who likes to write and draw. Yeah.
Oh, well, I've got a million thoughts on that subject. The short answer is it was only a few years ago, actually, well, before COVID, it was 2019, I guess. Jennifer and I took our first trip to Europe. We went to Paris and London, and I interviewed some cartoonists. And one particular cartoonist was doing live illustration, and it seemed like something that maybe I'd come across, but I really didn't know that much about it. So I just started to research it, and now I've become so aware that it's a fairly common thing, but it's also something that a lot of people don't know about yet.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just don't know about it, but it's definitely, it has its evangelists. Well, some are more what would be the word? More, I don't know what well, attractive to me. What's his name? Rode, the guy, the sketch note guy. I love his approach. So, and he's actually done stuff at comics conventions.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting, it's very similar to comics making, but also really different. And
Yes.
a lot of the people I know who become very good at graphic recording actually started out not being comic artists because there's this difficult hurdle with it, which is when you're a great comic artist, you get used to working slow, making things like look as good as possible. Whereas graphic recording is like fast and dirty and you do not have time to make things look really great. So you have to figure out this like, it's good enough, it'll do kind of
Yeah.
approach, which I actually like because it takes the pressure off. Because it's like I'll draw things when I'm graphic recording that are not that great, but I'll be like, I only had 2 minutes to draw that. What can you expect? And that's quite liberating because you don't have time to over labor it. But it can be hard for some people when they first start because they're just like, I have no time to do anything. How does anyone do this? And you
Yeah.
just, it's like sport or, muscle building. It's really hard and weird when you first do it. And then you slowly do it more and more over time. And you learn little tricks and hacks of how to work fast. And, you develop your own style and level of comfort around it. That said, whenever I graphic record, like the moment before the event starts, I always go, oh my gosh, I've forgotten how to do this. Oh my gosh, how does this work? Oh my gosh. And then you have
Yeah.
to like not think and just do and just sort of get into the flow and then it's okay. But if you start thinking too much, it's like, ah.
I know that's very interesting. I think that is a experience that a lot of comedians might have. They think that I'm not going to know my whole act. I just don't know it. And then one thing that people in graphic recording will say to each other is, we all don't know what we're doing. We obviously people do know what they're doing, but it's a reassuring feeling.
Yeah.
You know more than the audience. You just believe that, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah. And you learn things like you structure your page based on, you have a session that's 2 hours. So you think, okay, the page, I'll put that into blocks of 15 or 30 minutes to cover the space in the time we have. And, you learn tricks of doing a nice title, choosing a color palette before you start. So you've got everything set up and then it's like improv and you kind of respond to what's being said and, make it happen. But it is a lot like improv music or improv comedy where you're responding. It's kind of a call and response, particularly if you're working with a group who are watching what you're doing. They'll often comment on the image, or your image kind of leads their conversation a little bit, which can be amazing for keeping people on track in a meeting. But yeah, I could talk for so long about graphic recording, so I'll stop.
Well, I'll just tell you one thing. I've started to actually get my hand in there and do some graphic recording. And
Oh, wow.
one thing that I was quite a relief for me was they didn't want to see the whole process from start to finish. They didn't want to have a screen of me. They wanted to just bring me in at like 3 or 4 times during the session. Okay, fine with me.
Oh,
So
good. Yeah.
I'm there behind the scenes drawing, and they don't realize that some of these things I've already created beforehand. So I've got layers with stuff that they'll never know about.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if a professional graphic designer, you just, hey, you do it. You know what you're doing.
Mm,
And the same with a graphic recorder. Okay,
yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
trust you.
Yeah. A lot of it is trust, to be sure. Yeah. And it's great that how have you found it? Like, do you find it exciting and fun, and also terrifying
Yes.
to do it?
Well, someone suggested do 10 graphic recordings and see how you feel after that. And it was like just like a tough love thing, like a little. Let's see if you really are interested. I am. I find I find it natural, and maybe it's appealing to people who like to keep journals, who just, and if you come from different backgrounds, like a painting background, creative writing, things where you're working your mind, you're constantly you're interested in subjects, you want to boil it down to the essence. So I do find it fun. I
Yeah.
find it can be, I can see that terrifying feeling of, do I even know what I'm doing? But you know that you do, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when things go really wrong, at least you're not doing brain surgery, or, you know, that's the other thing I say to myself, is like, the stakes are actually quite low. Even if I
Right.
muck this up terribly, nothing, really bad's going to happen from that. So that's a load off. But that's great that you're giving it a shot.
Yeah, I'm in it for the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. The other thing I like about it is you kind of end up being like a, benign spy, which is that because you have the skill set, you get to go and work with lots of different people and hear conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so if you like learning about stuff, it's a really great way to learn about different industries, cultures, problems, solutions, all kinds of stuff. And I find that really fruitful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have a quirky look at the world, that's such a great advantage, because a lot of graphic recording, it can get generic, but if you have a quirky outlook, that's how you draw, that's how you roll, then that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
More power to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
Yes,
to
you
have a
bet.
chat with you.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. And yeah, I hope that you have a nice spring. We've
You too.
gone into autumn, so we're getting the opposite.
And good luck with the graphic novel. I'm sure that's going
Yeah,
to work itself out.
thank you.